one of the things that we've got in the state of New York is a seriously dysfunctional government that can't even keep up with their obligation to provide a viable budget. How are you going to deal with that mob in Albany?
Well, first thing is you have to have a plan, which, unlike the other candidates say they're going to cut spending, but they never tell you exactly where. I actually have a plan. These are the cuts we're going to make. I tell people who's going to get fired, which is, extreme, but the reality is if you're going to cut spending, that means you're firing people. You can call it laying off if you want to make it sound nicer, but some people have to lose their jobs if the government's going to spend less money. And Lazio, Cuomo, Palladino, they all say, well, we'll figure that out when we get in. I tell people up front, you go to my website, it's wredlich.com, or you can just Google Stop Wasting Money. If you Google Stop Wasting Money, you'll find me. You can see where we're going to cut spending, where the plan is. So that's the start, is you actually have to have a plan for where you're going to cut spending. You're not just going to restructure government. That's not a plan. You're not just going to get in there and say, okay, in 100 days I'll figure it out. That's not a plan. That's a plan to have a plan. And the second step is you have to recognize that they were elected too, that the people elected the legislators to be a part of that decision. The Palladino approach is I'm going to walk in there with a baseball bat. Everything changes on day one. He's kind of following the Eliot Spitzer model. We saw how that worked out. With Spitzer, apparently that meant having parties with hookers in the governor's mansion. That's not going to work. And, Carl Palladino, everything changes on day one. I guess the governor will be sending out racist and pornographic emails. That's not what we need. We don't need a guy walking in the legislature with a baseball bat or a shotgun or a street sweeper or whatever. We need somebody who's going to walk in and work with the legislators. Somebody who's going to recognize these guys got elected. These members of the legislature, men and women, got elected, and we've got to figure out how do we persuade them that this is the way. And so the biggest item in my plan, the one that really stands out, that grabs people's attention, I ask people to guess. What do you think the head of the New York Public Library makes? It's the biggest public library in the state, and the biggest one in New York City in particular. What do you think the head of the New York Public Library makes? It's the one with the lions in the front. And people will guess $100,000 a year, $120,000, $150,000. Some people know I'm onto something. They'll say $200,000 or $250,000. He makes $689,000 a year. $689,000 a year. Now, I know it's a big library, okay? But we have a big state, and the governor makes $179,000 a year. The president, it's a big country, makes $425,000 a year. We don't need to pay the head of a public library $689,000 a year. That doesn't make sense. And so there's a serious policy proposal behind that. It's not perfect, but if we cap public sector pay at $100,000 a year, state, local authorities, et cetera, there's 90,000 bureaucrats in New York State who make over $100,000 a year. We will save $2 billion. This idea is very popular, and that's one of the things you use when you're trying to get the legislature to work with you, is you have to have something that the people support. So I'm going to restructure government is not something that motivates people and gets them, okay, let's go, walking in the legislature with a baseball bat. It doesn't really say anything. It doesn't tell people what you're doing that matters. But this idea of capping public sector pay, most people realize that $100,000 a year is a lot of money. And we can get good people to do just about any job. Doctors would be an exception. You're going to have to pay more to doctors. But that idea is very popular, and you start with that, and then you go to the legislators and you say, I want you on board with this pay cap idea. If you're on board with the pay cap idea, I'll help you with your next election. If you're not on board, I'm going to find somebody to run against you, and I'm going to help them. And that's plain and simple. That's the kind of thing that legislators understand. They want to win their next election. They don't want to lose their next election. So you start with a popular issue, and you get the legislators on board with it. You pick up the most vulnerable legislators first, and you work your way up to the ones who are in the middle who think they're safe, but they might not be. And eventually you have a bunch of legislators on board, and you can get something passed. That's how you do it. It's not baseball bats.
Okay, so more of a finesse approach to, or actually being a statesman and a politician as opposed to just forcing change.